The special counsel investigating Donald Trump's assorted crimes, Jack Smith, has filed a motion before the United States Supreme Court. I talked about this earlier. Jack Smith is asking the Supreme Court to rule on whether or not President Trump could be found innocent based on the claim of presidential immunity. There's no such thing as presidential immunity. Smith is trying to short-circuit the appeals process by taking it straight to the Supreme Court. Trump's attorneys are already trying to get the two criminal trials thrown out. Jack Smith's two criminal trials, they want them thrown out based on this horseshit notion that presidents can't be prosecuted for crimes they committed while they served as chief executive. Complete horseshit. Judge Tanya S. Chutkan, who is presiding over the election interference trial in D.C., rejected that argument. So what's going on? Why are they filing these ridiculous motions? Delay, delay, delay. Gum up the works. According to the New York Times, Trump's attorneys are appealing Judge Chutkan's ruling in order to postpone the trial, which is scheduled to begin in March. The thinking is, if the defense attorneys can delay long enough by going through the appeals process, eventually Donald Trump will become president again, and then his Justice Department will independently decide to toss the charges out, to independently decide to lock up Jack Smith and probably Judge Tanya Chutkan. Delay, delay, delay. Just get him back in the Oval Office. That's the idea. Tomorrow, Trump's attorneys must hand to the Supreme Court their response to Jack Smith's motion. Now, there is no guarantee that our Supreme Court will allow Jack Smith to leapfrog over the appeals courts. Jack be nimble, Jack be quick. Jack jumped over. I wish I were more clever. But he's trying to leapfrog over the appeals courts and get it right into the Supreme Court. One of the justices who will be deciding whether to allow the appeal of Judge Tanya Chutkan's ruling, whether they're going to allow it to be expedited straight to the Supreme Court, one of those justices is, Clarence Thomas. How do you think Clarence Thomas will rule? How will he rule? Do you think he'll say no to Jack Smith? You think he'll say, let's not hear this case quite yet? You know, the Trump attorneys insist Trump's got presidential immunity. You think Judge Thomas will say, let's have this wind its way through the appeals process before it gets to us? Or do you think Judge Thomas will say, you know what, let's hear the appeal right now. It's a high-profile case. We do this all the time. It involves the office of the presidency. We have an election in November. We have this trial in March. We've expedited rulings in the past. We've allowed prosecutors, attorneys to jump over the appeals courts. Let's take the case right now and make a ruling so we can decide if Trump's criminal trial should or shouldn't start in March. How do you think Judge Clarence Thomas will rule? I'll give you a hint. On January 19th, 2022, the Supreme Court of the United States upheld a lower court ruling that said President Trump had to turn over to the January 6th committee all relevant documents related to their ongoing investigation. Every single justice ruled in favor of the January 6th committee. Every single justice on the Supreme Court ruled that Donald Trump did not have executive privilege. He's no longer president. He has to turn over to the January 6th committee all relevant documents. Every single justice but one said Donald Trump had to turn over these documents. Every justice but one. Can you guess which justice? Clarence Thomas. Clarence Thomas. Interestingly enough, the White House documents that then had to be delivered to the January 6th committee revealed numerous text messages to the Trump White House from Clarence Thomas's wife, Ginny. Text messages, about 29 text messages that were of interest that were sent during the period between November of 2020, right after the election, and January 6, 2021. In her numerous texts, there was a back and forth between Ginny Thomas and White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows. Ginny Thomas, in about 29 texts, this is a woman who still maintains Joe Biden stole the election. Clarence Thomas married to an inveterate election denier. She urged the White House to keep fighting, to keep Trump in office. She and Mark Meadows went back and forth about how this is a battle between good and evil, and they believe they've got God on their side. That's in the texts. She urged Mark Meadows not to fire the lawyer, Sidney Powell, whose stolen election theories were starting to make even Donald Trump think she was crazy. That's how off the wall her election theories were. Cassidy, I think it was Cassidy Hutchinson. In her book, she wrote that Donald Trump was talking in the lead up to January 6th. He was talking to Sidney Powell, and he had her on a speakerphone, and then he mouthed the words, "She's crazy," because she took it seriously. Donald Trump knew there was no such thing as election fraud, but Sidney Powell, she was a child prodigy. She really was. And, I think she graduated from law school like when she was 5, something like that. Sidney Powell was like off the charts, but she peaked too early intellectually. And I think she believed the election was stolen, and Donald Trump said, "This woman's crazy." So she's actually believes this shit. Well, Ginny Thomas came to her defense. They were going to fire Sidney Powell, and there are text messages where Ginny Thomas is saying, "Keep her. She's good. She's a good person. She's smart." Ginny Thomas was also in constant communication, according to the subpoenaed documents, with John Eastman, a friend and former law clerk of Judge Clarence Thomas, who is currently on trial in Georgia for writing all the memos outlining why Mike Pence should refuse to certify the election. Even when the insurrection was going on, John Eastman was sending emails to Mike Pence's chief of staff during the insurrection, "Don't certify." So it's odd that out of all 9 justices, the only one who voted against releasing these documents to the January 6th committee would end up being Ginny Thomas's husband, Clarence. That is why yesterday 8 Democratic members of the House Judiciary Committee wrote a letter urging Clarence Thomas to recuse himself from making a decision on Donald Trump's presidential immunity. Yeah, I could see why they might think Clarence Thomas would rule that President Donald Trump is immune from prosecution. Clarence Thomas is immune from prosecution. He's just an associate justice of the Supreme Court, so why wouldn't he think Donald Trump is immune from prosecution? And now the Supreme Court is going to have to decide whether or not the Colorado Supreme Court was correct when it ruled that Donald Trump participated in an insurrection. They're going to have to decide whether it was an insurrection and is therefore under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, Donald Trump would be ineligible to hold office. How do you think Clarence Thomas is going to rule on that? Especially since Ginny Thomas was there on January 6th in the crowd. And it got cold and she had to go home. But, she didn't storm the Capitol. She went home. But she was there. She was there. There are 29 text messages between her and Mark Meadows in the lead up to January 6th. Messages on record. You can look these up. CBS found these, CNN, the Washington Post, the New York Times. These are some of her messages in the lead up to January 6th. Quote, "Help this great president stand firm, Mark!" Exclamation point 3 times. Mark Meadows. "You are the leader with him who is standing for America's constitutional governance at the precipice. The majority knows Biden and the left is attempting the greatest heist of our history." Then another message. Sounds like Sidney and her team, Sidney Powell. Here she is coming to the defense of Sidney Powell, who Donald Trump thinks is crazy. Sounds like Sidney and her team are getting inundated with evidence of fraud. Make a plan, release the Kraken, and save us from the left taking America down. Ginny Thomas called for Trump and Mark Meadows to release the Kraken. And then some really sick stuff about her army getting Trump's back. We got your back. I got my army. We got your back. And then tearfully praying for Trump to stay in office. There is only one word to describe these texts. It is the same word to describe Ginny Thomas. It's one word: unhinged. This woman sounds and reads and behaves unhinged, which is why I recommend Clarence Thomas should probably recuse himself from the Supreme Court entirely. He had a nice run. He's the oldest justice. Plus, he feels cheated. He could have, this is what he always says to the wealthy donors, he could have had a job at a top law firm that would have paid him $6 to $8 million a year. Clarence, come on, recuse yourself from the entire court. You can finally be paid to make speeches. You've been giving it away on the street. Now you can get paid for those speeches. And you could finally trade in that tired, broken down recreational vehicle for something new and exciting that wouldn't embarrass you. And by tired, broken down recreational vehicle, I mean your wife, Ginny. She's not just an embarrassment. In my opinion, I find her disgusting. You should recuse yourself from the Supreme Court and your wife, Ginny Thomas. Recuse yourself. You could do so much better than Ginny, Clarence. And don't feel bad. I heard she went to law school but couldn't pass the bar exam. Fix her up on a date with Jim Jordan. They have a lot in common. I'm David Feldman, reminding you to stay strong and protect the weak. Jim Jordan, I don't know if I ever mentioned this before, but Jim Jordan, the Republican chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, attended law school, but couldn't pass the bar exam. Did I ever mention that before? And apparently, from what I've ascertained, Ginny Thomas had trouble passing the bar exam. That's what I've heard. That's what people are saying. Don't know if it's 100% true, but I think she couldn't pass the Nebraska bar exam. How hard is it to pass? I'm sorry. Nebraska's a great state. I got to stop picking on any place that isn't New York City. It's a bad habit. Where am I?